I looked up from the paper and saw my wife Debbie standing in the living room doorway. Her arms were crossed, and she had a serious expression on her face that I wasn't used to seeing. Behind her walked a young man in his early 20s with a smug grin. I'd never seen him before. "What's the matter, Deb?" I asked, setting the newspaper aside. She walked further into the room, the young man following her. "Charlie, this is Michael. I met him a few months ago at my book club." Michael gave me a cursory nod but said nothing. I stared at him for a moment before answering. "Okay." Debbie sighed. "Well, the thing is, Michael and I have been dating for a while now." I blinked in surprise. "Dating? You mean dating?" "Something like that, yeah," Debbie replied, not quite meeting my gaze. "I see," I said slowly. "And you felt it necessary to bring him here to tell me this in person?" "I know it's awkward, Charlie, but you had a right to know," Debbie said. She reached out to touch my arm comfortingly, but seemed to change her mind. Michael chose that moment to finally speak. "Yeah, sorry, man, but your wife is pretty hot." "Couldn't resist," he said with a smirk. I glared at him. "I don't think I was addressing you. And for the record, it's Mr. Martin to you." Michael's eyes narrowed angrily, but he said nothing. I turned my attention back to my wife. "How long has this been going on, Deb?" Debbie lowered her gaze guiltily to her hands. "It's been about 6 months now. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I just couldn't find the right way to." I held up my hand to stop her. "Just stop. I think you've said enough already." I stood up from my chair, shaking my head in bewilderment. I needed to be alone to get over this betrayal. Briskly pacing from the room, I heard Debbie call out to me. "Charlie, wait. Can't we talk about this?" I ignored her and continued walking. There was nothing else for me to say right now. I sprinted out of the house, slamming the front door behind me. My mind went into overdrive. How could Debbie do this to me after 14 years of marriage? I suspected that things had cooled between us lately, but I never thought she could cheat on me. I got in my car and just drove aimlessly, trying to think it all through. About 15 minutes later, my cell phone rang. I looked down and saw that it was Debbie. I hesitated for a moment, but finally answered. "What do you need?" I asked sharply. "Oh, Charlie, I'm so glad you answered," Debbie said with relief. "I know you're upset, but can we get together and talk about it? I really think that if we just communicate, we can work things out." I laughed bitterly. "Work things out? I don't see how we can recover from this, Deb. You lied and cheated on me for 6 months. With some young brat, no less." "Michael isn't just some brat," Debbie replied defensively. "He cares about me and understands me in ways you haven't in years. But that doesn't mean I don't still love you, Charlie. Maybe you should have thought about that before you jumped into bed with him behind my back," I exclaimed. Debbie was silent for a few moments. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. "I never meant to hurt you like that. I just felt so alone and disconnected from you. I know that's no excuse. I just feel awful about the whole situation. But I hope that we can try to save our marriage if we really work at it. I'll do anything, Charlie." I sighed, my anger dissipating a little. "I just don't know, Deb. Right now I need to be alone and think. Don't try to contact me today. I'll get back to you when I'm ready to talk." "Okay," Debbie replied quietly. "I understand. Take as much time as you need. I'll be here when you want to talk." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. As I continued to drive aimlessly, I wondered if I would ever be ready for the upcoming conversation. After a nearly sleepless night spent tossing and turning, I dragged myself out of bed the next morning. My conversation with Debbie was still weighing on me. As hurt and angry as I was, some part of me still loved her. After all, we had built a whole life together. I headed to the kitchen to make coffee. While I was waiting for the coffee to brew, there was a knock on the front door. When I opened it, I saw Debbie standing there, mascara smeared under her eyes as if she'd been crying. "Oh, Charlie," she said, "you look as awful as I feel." I sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "What are you doing here, Deb? I know you said you needed to be alone, but we really need to talk about some things," she replied. She hesitated before adding, "Can I come in?" I considered refusing for a moment, but eventually stepped aside to let her in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and I poured myself a cup of coffee. Debbie cleared her throat delicately. "First of all, I'd like to apologize again for bringing all of this down on you the way I did. Catching you off guard was very unfair." I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "The ambush wasn't really, no. But finding out your wife has been cheating on you for months is what's really unfair, Deb." Debbie lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. My actions are inexcusable. But I came here to ask, do you think there's still hope for us? Maybe we should try marriage counseling." I shook my head tiredly. "I just don't know, Deb. I still care, but I don't know how I can trust you again after such a betrayal. I think we need to seriously consider divorce." Debbie began to cry quietly. I still hated to see her pain, but I meant it. The trust between us was shattered, perhaps forever. Over the next few days, Debbie and I had several long conversations about our relationship. As hard as some of those conversations were, I began to treat the possibility of reconciliation a little more openly. We had so much in common that it seemed a shame to just throw it all away without first trying to make things right. During one of our conversations, I brought up a topic that was bothering me. "Can I ask what it is about this Michael guy that you're so attracted to?" Debbie pondered the question. "I think it's that feeling of excitement that comes with someone new. The thrill of it all. He looks at me like what?" I asked. "Like I'm the most beautiful woman in the world," Debbie said quietly. "A long time ago, you used to look at me like that too." Her words hurt me, even though I knew she was right. Over the years, our emotional closeness had faded. "I admit I've become complacent in our marriage," I told her. "But I want a chance to rebuild a relationship with you, Deb, to try to bring back the fire that used to be between us. I'm willing to do my best if you agree." Debbie reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes sparkling. "You have no idea how important it was for me to hear you say that, Charlie. I want that too, more than anything in the world. I'm ready to put Michael in the past and focus on us." I squeezed